Hi, my name is Ona Haja and I'm the Executive Director of Art Science Museum in Singapore. Welcome to a very special live event here at Art Science at Home, the online program of Art Science Museum. Shortly, we're going to be joined by the pioneering UK-based art and technology collective Blast Theory, which is led by Matt Adams, Nick Tandavanitj, and Ju Ro Fa. Today, we're live on YouTube and Facebook, and we want to hear your comments and questions during today's live event. We'd love to know who's with us today, so please do come onto the comment section of YouTube and Facebook, say hi, and let us know where you're watching from. Later on, if you've got questions for Blast Theory, just pop them into the comment section of the stream, and my colleagues are going to see them as they come in, and they'll relay the questions to us as we go through today's event. Before we bring in our very special guests, I'd like to provide a little bit of a backstory, if you will, that might shed some light on why we're so excited about today's event. Last year, the visionary art group Blast Theory made a public art performance which explored how large-scale public gatherings intensify pandemics. Yes, I said last year. Blast Theory have made something of a career of being ahead of their time, but in the case of their extraordinary and poignant artwork, spread simultaneously commemorating the past. In a few moments, Blast Theory will be joining me for an artist talk, which explores that project and others. And that'll be followed by a Q&A where we hope to involve you in a conversation. So we're looking forward to having you with us for the next hour or so as we explore how art can explore ideas and feelings about science, health, and the future. As I said, today's event is part of Art Science Museum's online program, Art Science at Home. In this program, we're inviting you to experience the museum from the comfort of your home whilst the COVID-19 pandemic continues to really wreak havoc across the world. Since Art Science at Home launched, we've created a series of online projects that respond to the challenges that COVID-19 has created. This has included an online conference about how we adapt and evolve to uncertain futures. We've held workshops that encourage children to express gratitude for the underappreciated members of our community. And we've held performances and commissioned films made by artists who are in lockdown, which gives us a way of being able to continue to support our local arts community. Whilst our museum was closed, Art Science at Home was our primary public program. But even since we reopened on the 1st of July, Art Science at Home remains a vital way for us to tell the museum stories to audiences here in Singapore and around the world. Today's event with Blast Theory is the first in a new series of talks by artists whose work in some way explores the aesthetics and the politics of the future. In 1964, the media theorist Marshall McLuhan wrote, "Art at its most significant is a distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what is beginning to happen to it." The notion of an artist as an antenna which picks up on weak signals from the future is of deep interest to us at Art Science Museum. We explored the intersection between art, science, technology and culture because we believe it's in the place where these areas meet that the future is made. So in this new series of talks, we'll explore how art has a tendency to anticipate the future. We'll examine how art can, as Walter Benjamin once noted, precede perceptible reality by years, sometimes offering powerful insights into how society is evolving and how new advances in science and technology are being synthesized. So what better way to kick off this new strand of programming than with a talk by an artist group who have always felt, to me at least, to have had one foot in the near future. So let me introduce two of the founding members of Blast Theory from their base in Brighton in the UK. There are a few artists who have a more formidable track record of conceptual and technological innovation than Blast Theory. In a career spanning nearly 30 years, they've consistently operated at the bleeding edge of immersive and interactive storytelling. They pioneered many forms of interactive art and participative theatre years before they became more common sights at museums and festivals around the world. Since 1991, they've been using novel technologies to create new forms of performance and installation. Their works include radical political theatre works such as Operation Black Antler and Kidnap, groundbreaking location-based outdoor performances like Can You See Me Now and A Machine to See With, and highly innovative installations like Desert Rain and My Point Forward. Their artworks bring audiences together through mobile devices, the internet, physical spaces, and broadcasting. They draw on popular culture, theatre, technology, and games to blur the boundaries between the real and the fictional. And as we said earlier, recently, Blast Theory have created a series of eerily prescient artworks that explore pandemics and epidemics. That's going to be one of the main themes of their talk today. So to take us through a presentation of their artwork, please help me welcome Matt Adams and Nick Tandavanitj. Nick, I think you're going to take us off first, so please take it away. We'd love to hear what you have to say today.
I'd like to just sort of introduce the two other members of Blast Theory, or the two other artists. They are Juro Farr and Matt Adams. And we've been working together for the last nearly 30 years now. Well, nearly 30 years now, making interactive artworks, and we're based in Brighton in the UK. And as you say, in 2018, we became the first artist in residence at the World Health Organization in Geneva. And that residency took place from between January and March. And over the course of that time, we had unprecedented access to the operations of the emergency response parts of the World Health Organization. So looking at those parts of the World Health Organization that look particularly at contagious disease and at pandemics. While we were there, we were based in one of the key rooms that is likely to have been the key room during the response to the coronavirus pandemic, which was the Strategic Health Operations Center. And so this is a room that's hidden away in the middle of the headquarters in Geneva. And we would attend the daily meeting, and the daily meeting at the Strategic Health Operations Center comprises about 30 members of staff, and they're all experts from their own department in areas such as yellow fever or flu or Ebola. And they come together in the room each day and they look at a very tight agenda of new signals. And these are health signals which have been brought, which have been processed through the WHO's surveillance operation. And that surveillance operation processes something like 500,000 contagious disease health signals per month. So they have a network of doctors and a network of government-based bodies and NGOs who are all looking for contagious disease outbreaks. And each month, those 500,000 signals or indicators of potential outbreaks are processed down and filtered down by their information systems department to just a handful, which looked at each day in this daily meeting. And so we had the privilege of being able to spend the first 30 minutes of our day every day as we were resident at the WHO to eavesdrop on these meetings and to see the WHO at work. And the thing, it really raised two very significant things for us. And in addition to this, we also, by being present in this meeting, we became close to understanding who are the important figures and who are the key decision makers in WHO. And so it allowed us to meet those people and actually we interviewed something like 20 people across the team. And a lot of those people were people who were attending this daily meeting. But two of the things that really sort of struck us about the work of the WHO when we were residents there was really this vertiginous scope, this huge network of surveillance which the WHO runs. It's looking across the globe in something like 194 member states who are all contributing health data to their systems to try and understand where the next contagious disease outbreak might come from. And we were attending meetings where this team of experts were discussing unusual deaths at a family funeral in single figures in a remote village somewhere. And the sense that this operation was simultaneously looking across the globe, yet talking about individuals who died at a family funeral. It was just completely remarkable. The second thing that we learnt, and it became very much apparent as we attended more meetings and as we actually spoke to some of the members of the staff there, was although the WHO is ostensibly a technical organization, it's there to create medical health standards and publish best practice and procedures for hygiene and for treatment. It's actually a very social and political organization. And I think one of this quote that we have here was from Dr. Mike Ryan, who has subsequently been a key figure in WHO's response to the coronavirus pandemic. And we were lucky enough to interview him when we were at the WHO. And we, at the time, they were discussing potential outbreaks of disease in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. And the "we need to socialize that" was his comment when it came to how they dealt with this as a medical emergency, was that their goal wasn't just about technically how they could respond to the crisis or potential crisis with medical equipment and with staff. It was how they could talk about it, how they could leverage, exert political leverage on local governments and organizations to assist, and how they could try and find ways to fund it. So it was apparent that the work of the WHO, although it's very technical, was also one around communication, and it was around telling stories, and it's also one around looking at the levers of power and how health intersects with systems of power. Second quote that we have here is from Christopher Dye, who is head of director of strategy, and he talks about the moment of when the WHO decides to declare a public health emergency of international concern. And this is a process that we've all been through with coronavirus this year, where in January the WHO did just that. And he described it as almost a lose-lose situation, as one where on the one hand, if they declare a public health emergency too soon, an outbreak is contained, but everyone turns to the WHO and says, well, what was the problem? This outbreak caused no problem. And if they declare it too late, then we may find ourselves in a situation where there is a pandemic, as we find now. So the challenge for us was really how could we make an artistic response to this organization and to this experience that we had. How could we distill the kind of breadth of activity of WHO into something that was succinct and that felt kind of important and personal? And how could we find a way that we could talk about some of these challenges around not the technical challenges, but the social challenges of the work of the WHO. And obviously, as Blast Theory, we're not necessarily here to be cheerleading for an organization like WHO, but it would be fair to say we were impressed by the way they operated. And so we really were trying to find a story or an insight that would lead us to understand what contagious disease could tell us about our own experience and about a very human experience. And the key for us was coming across the story of the Metropole Hotel in WHO's report on SARS from 2003. So as I'm sure lots of you know, SARS was an epidemic which spread from southern China, much like the coronavirus. And one of the key spreading events, and at the time it was called super spreading events, was an event which took place in Hong Kong on the 21st of February in 2003. On that night, a doctor who unwittingly or unknowingly had been treating patients with SARS in southern China had come to Hong Kong to attend a family wedding. And he stayed on the 9th floor of the Metropole Hotel. In the course of that one night, he subsequently infected 16 people who then, again, unwittingly and unknowingly, took the virus across the globe to Canada, to the US, to the Philippines, to Australia, to Singapore, to Vietnam. And the key for us, the thing that really struck us, was the very human nature of the story and the very familiar nature of the story. And our relationships to pandemics now has obviously changed dramatically in the light of the coronavirus. But at the time, we were really trying to find something that felt like a tangible journey, an emotional journey that people had been on. One of the ways that we work in Blast Theory is always trying to find ways to put the audience in the shoes of the people whose experiences we're trying to interrogate or talk about. And for us, the Metropole Hotel felt like very close. It felt very near to our own experiences of staying in hotels, going on trips. It felt very immediate. And as for an audience who spend their lives doing very much those things, to talk about a pandemic as something that intersects with the very mundane parts of your life was really a key for us. The other side of it was the very detailed work that we then read about that epidemiologists who were studying this outbreak and this particular incident did to try and understand the properties of SARS and how it was transmitted. So once contact tracing had established that the Metropole Hotel was the site of the super spreading event, the epidemiologists then undertook a program where they tried to understand the flow of the virus across the 9th floor of the hotel and how it could have infected 16 people in the course of a single night, which seemed unprecedented. And they found that the hotel had a very unique ventilation system. And part of the way that they found that was through using smoke tests, where they released smoke in the rooms of the people who had stayed in the hotel. And for us, this seemed like a very interesting image, this idea that epidemiologists had taken such a detailed and precise approach to find out something which was very significant about how the disease was spread, but it also was very suggestive to us of this sense of trying to explore the unknown. The idea that you could learn something through the passage of smoke through a hotel was just a kind of remarkable image for us. And it was one that really stayed with us when we went on to make the work that we then made. So our response, so this slide shows some of the transmissions of that were came about through that event at the Metropole Hotel. Of the 16 people, I think 4 of the guests were based in Singapore and became index patients for outbreaks, which then carried on through Singapore. So the path we chose was to make a piece of work which became a piece of work called A Cluster of 17 Cases. And we decided that we would do our very best to try and recreate this work, the epidemiological work of the WHO scientists, where they had used smoke to try and track the path of the virus, but also to try and really put ourselves in the shoes of the guests who had stayed in the hotel that night. And to do that, we went through a process of researching the hotel. So this is actually a photograph from the period of one of the bathrooms in the hotel. And we found floor plans for the rooms of the hotel. And we used these floor plans and these photographs from the hotel to actually start building a 3D model of the hotel itself. So this is one of the early models where we produced essentially a CAD drawing, which then we went on to extend to being a CAD model which laid out the entire floor plan for the 9th floor. So within this floor plan, room 911, which was the room that the doctor from southern China stayed in, is directly below the lift block, which is in the center. So it's along the bottom row of pictures. So in making the model, we also tried to recreate the process of passing smoke through the model to try and recreate the experiments that the scientists had undertaken. So this is a photograph of us working with some of the fabricators, and we have what was we were told was the world's smallest smoke machine, a tiny CX smoke machine, and we used that to create similar smoke dispersals as to those used by epidemiologists. The form of our 3-dimensional CAD model of the 9th story of the hotel was that we decided to turn this into a physical model. So the physical model was a 1 to 50 scale, and we decided to produce this in milled aluminium. And so this is some of the process of producing this model. Here we can see the sort of bathrooms in progress for one of the rooms. This was ultimately fitted with an interactive lighting system. So this work, A Cluster of 17 Cases, has now been shown 3 times at the Museum of the City of New York, at the Taekwon in Hong Kong, and now at the Museum of Physical and Medical Science in Leiden in the Netherlands. And each time we've chosen to show this model with a fictional account. So this is the version of the model that we showed in Hong Kong and a setup for the exhibit. And so the key for us was to really find a way to place the audience, as I say, in the shoes of people who stayed on the 9th floor of the hotel on that night. And so in each place we've written a a fictional account of the experience of someone staying on the floor of that hotel and going through that process of becoming aware of the pandemic, and then reflecting back on the consequences and the outbreak of having stayed in the hotel on that night. Alongside the model and that interactive audio, we also showed a recording of our interview with Dr. Mike Ryan, who was the WHO's coordinator for their SARS response in 2003. And that recording in particular focuses on our interest in really understanding the WHO's more complex and more social challenges in responding to an outbreak like SARS, or now like COVID-19. It really focuses on the risk and the challenges of how you work in this space where, although COVID-19 is now much better known, and at the time, and SARS is now much better known, at the time they had no understanding of what they were working with. And so there's a constant process of taking risks and making guesses about the best way to react in those situations. And so the final piece of work becomes a twofold interactive audio piece, one where you hear directly the experience of those who'd stayed in the hotel, or an account of someone who might have stayed in the hotel, and on the other side, an account from WHO as to how they managed their response. So this last slide shows the smoke actually in the model, and this is the work is actually still ongoing. So although we've shown the work 3 times, we're still working on our smoke system to create something, this really ephemeral and intangible experience of the smoke moving through a hotel room. And so this is hopefully we're going to find a new form for this work to be shown. So that's it from me. And so that's, I think, having spoken about a cluster of 17 cases, I think Matt will be telling you about our project, a Spit Spreads Death the Parade, which we produced in Philadelphia last year.
That we make, we're always creating interactive projects, and Nick's given an insight there in terms of how we think about interaction, perhaps in a gallery space. But each time we come to make a piece of work, we think about it from scratch, about what is the right form for that work, and how do we invite the public to occupy a position inside a work that feels meaningful to them, and that gives them a real insight into the areas that we're interested in. We were invited to the World Health Organization on the back of a piece of work we were already doing with the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. And the Wellcome Trust heard about this project that was already in development, and that's why these 2 works are connected. I would love to say it was our insight that meant that we were working with pandemics in 2018 and 2019, but actually it was other people who invited us to think about these questions. I'm going to just set the scene a little bit about the flu pandemic of 1918. Many of you may well be familiar with this, but it's worth just reminding ourselves the scale of what happened in 1918, especially as we are all dealing with COVID-19 here today, where 15 million people have now been infected. In 1918, 500 million people caught the flu in a 12-month period, and between 50 and 100 million people died. In Philadelphia, it was a city that was one of the worst hit in North America. One of the reasons that epidemiologists think that the disease spread so quickly around the world, and it really was every corner of the globe, from Alaska to islands in the South Pacific, was the fact that the war was underway, and soldiers and sailors acted as vectors for the disease. They helped to spread the disease as they moved around the world for the war. In Philadelphia, as in many places, the numbers of dead came so quickly that in some cases they ran out of undertakers, and members of the public helped to bury bodies, and in some cases bodies had to be buried in mass graves. And this chart shows Philadelphia compared to other US cities with this enormous death rate. I hope that that you've got enough resolution on your screen to be able to see that, but if you haven't, the top curve there is Philadelphia. And so when we were invited by the Mutter Museum to come in as artists, to work with a historical curator and with an epidemiological researcher, one of the questions has been, why was Philadelphia so badly hit? What was it that meant that the virus was so deadly in that city? One of the things that was going on during 1918 was a push to raise money for World War I. And in the US, that was done through Liberty Loan bonds, which were bonds where the public were invited to buy a bond, and that was then used to fund the war. And these were highly patriotic programs with a very strong focus on coercing as many members of the public as possible to take part. And these little buttons here are things that you would wear to show that you had contributed. And what became clear in the research in Philadelphia is that on the 28th of September 1918, a deadly mistake was made. A parade had been planned to raise money for the Liberty Loan bonds, and rather than cancel it as flu arrived into the city, the city elders gave the green light for the parade to go ahead, and around 200,000 people came onto the street, and within 3 days, every hospital bed in Philadelphia was filled. And so for us, this then became a vital lens through which to think about the work. We were aware of this very patriotic atmosphere at the time, and we decided that we would begin to make a piece of work about this parade. And from that, the idea of making a parade ourselves really came into form. We always collaborate in the projects that we make, and in this particular project, we collaborated with a composer, David Lang, and an amazing choir called The Crossing. And David Lang wrote a score based on this government document. And if you haven't already had a chance to watch the film of this piece of work, we will give you a link of that and show a small excerpt in a moment. And you will hear that some of the words of the score come from government advice, and some of those things feel quite eerie to be thinking that 100 years later we are still following similar advice. One of the lines here is, avoid crowded streetcars, walk to the office if possible, keep out of crowds, avoid theatres, and so on. So some things have changed, some things are very much the same. For this parade to happen, we created a public campaign to invite members of the public to come and participate with us. And this is a publicity photo that we created to invite people from the city to come and take part. We wanted both to commemorate people who died in 1918, but we also very much wanted to celebrate the work of those in public health. We were very mindful of the fact that there are thousands of people around the world working in public health every day who keep us safe. And in normal conditions, they are little seen, little acknowledged, and little celebrated. Of course, now we all have a much sharper understanding of how important those people are to us. This is a poster for the parade, and as you will see there, we held it on September 28th. It's the anniversary of the parade, 101 years earlier. And for the route, we decided we wanted to follow the same route as the parade had originally taken. And it started down in the Navy Yard. Philadelphia has a huge naval yard. And this is a photo from 1918 of the Naval Yard lit up at 10:30 at night because they were working around the clock to build warships. And on this map, you can see Philadelphia with the two rivers that gird the city, and it makes it clear just how much water is a part of the city. And this is the Navy Yard today. So right to this very day, there's an incredibly strong naval presence. So we chose to follow this route from the Navy Yard at the south of the city, which is in fact where Flu arrived into Philadelphia, north up Broad Street to City Hall, which is the seat of government in Philadelphia, and it's where the fateful decision was made that the parade should go ahead. And so last September, around 400 people gathered with us to make this walk. For us, the parade was about participation rather than spectacle, and we wanted everyone to have a unique investment in the work, and we wanted to really commemorate the individuals who died in 1918 in particular. And to do that, we decided that we could use the original research being done by epidemiological research partner to identify all 800 people who died on the very worst day of the flu pandemic, and to create an opportunity for each person who came on the parade to represent one of those people who died. What you see here is members of the public arriving at the parade, and they're collecting the death certificate of the person they have chosen to honor. Here's an example of a death certificate. It's probably a little bit hard to read on this screen, but you get a lot of information, and sometimes you get a strong sense of what happened. Sometimes you see husband and wife and child dying in quick succession, for example. You see people dying of flu who are 1 or 2 days old, for example. So you get these very strong sense of connection. Here is a photo from the parade where you see the people holding up the names of the people they're honoring. And this lady in the front here is also holding up her phone. I mentioned the score. For us, it was important that everyone was part of playing of this score. And so we created a piece of software to play the music back across everyone's phones who was on the parade. And we also created a mobile app so that you could choose who you were going to honor. So here on the left-hand side is a screen where you can choose who you wanted to commemorate by their name or their age, what neighborhood they lived in, or what their occupation was. And in the middle here is a screen where someone is looking at the occupations, and you can scroll through all the different jobs. So you might choose someone who has the same job as you, or a job that you feel you have a connection with. Of course, in Philadelphia, lots of people chose by neighborhood, because when you find out someone died on the street you live on, that's a very meaningful connection with someone from the past. And on the right here is a screen where someone has made their selection. They've chosen Salvatore Pasquale Contrella, presumably an immigrant from Italy. And it says, a homemaker who lived at 3916 North 9th Street in Hunting Park and died aged 28 years old. So it helps to bring to life some of the people who died. As well as that, people brought their own family histories. We spent a couple of years visiting Philadelphia in the build up to this work, and met many people who had family connections with what had happened. And you see here someone who's commemorating a nurse who died on September the 28th, 1918 from flu. And it was very striking to us how, even though these are ancient events, in some senses, they're very current in others, and that people found it a very moving and emotional connection to really go back to think about what the city was like at this moment of real crisis, when schools were closed, theaters were closed, bars, restaurants were closed, where coffins were lying in the street waiting to be collected, It's a really extreme moment of stress. And then, as now, there is strong evidence that people came together and worked together very collaboratively, that there was tremendous amounts of compassion and tremendous amounts of love and care shown for strangers as they supported each other through this experience. I mentioned that you choose someone to honor. The other aspect of this is we wanted one moment of reflection for each person who walked with us. And you see this in this photo here, and you'll see it in the excerpt from the film that we're going to show in just a moment, which is one at a time. We invited each parader to stop and stand still as the hundreds of people flowed past. And as they flowed past, these two white sculptures moved alongside you. And so for a few seconds, you're inside a corridor of white light, and you pass through this corridor as you stand still and have a few moments to think about the particular person who you're representing. And it's a very simple moment for each person to be highlighted and given a moment of reflection. So in just a moment, I'm going to show an excerpt from the film. But just before we do, the full film is currently available, and there's a link on the page for this talk, and there's a link here on this slide. And so the full 10.5-minute film is available just for a limited period of time during COVID-19. We have been given permission to make the film available online, and so I'd really invite you to watch the film in full if you're interested to do so. The film forms the entrance to the exhibition at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, and so it's really designed to act as an entry point and a connection to a historical telling of what happens in 1918. So you're going to hear some of the music and see some of the people who are participating. I hope you enjoy this short excerpt we're going to show now. I hope that you will have the opportunity to see the full version, and then I really look forward to having a discussion with Honor and with you afterwards. Okay, thanks.
Beware of those who are coughing and sneezing.
Ria Serla. George Benjamin Karcher.
Samuel Francis McLean.
Gertrude Holden.
Emily Johnson.
Well, thank you so much, Matt Adams and Nick Tandavanitj, for giving us an insight into a particular aspect of blast theory's practice. I'm really, really happy that you've joined us here, kind of from my old hometown in Brighton. It's so great to see you. I'm also really pleased to have all of our audience join us online. For those of you who have just joined us, we're live online at Art Science at Home, which is the online program of Art Science Museum in Singapore. And we're streaming today on YouTube and Facebook. And we're very keen to hear from you during the Q&A that we're about to kick off. So if you've got any comments or questions for Matt or Nick, reactions to the film that we've just seen or the projects that they've presented, please just pop them into the comment section of YouTube or Facebook, and we'll see them and we'll take your questions. But I guess while we sort of process what we've just seen, Matt and Nick, I want to start by saying thank you for sharing the background to these two artworks that you've chosen to focus on today, which now, as we've shared earlier, almost seem like uncanny precursors of what we're experiencing today with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I guess I want to start with a perhaps unusual question and ask how you're feeling. You know, in some ways, the horror of COVID-19 must have hit you harder than many other people, because through the research that you engaged with at the World Health Organization and for the project in Philadelphia, you had some idea of what was coming from those early news stories that came out in January. Both works, but I think particularly Spread's Death, are almost as if they anticipated or foretold the precise situation that we're in right now with COVID-19, even down to some of the details about large-scale public gatherings in the States. It's never a good thing, I think, to be the art world equivalent of Cassandra, the figure from Greek mythology who was cursed to deliver prophecies. But there is an element of prevision in this work that must be very emotionally complex for you both and for Ju to process. So I guess I just want to ask by asking how you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was caught unaware about the scale of COVID-19 as much as almost everyone else was, partly because we spent 2 years meeting people who said there will be another pandemic. It is not if, it is when a pandemic is coming. But we met so many dozens of people who were all preparing for that exact eventuality. We met so many people who were laying plans every day for what to happen when the next pandemic comes, that I had confidence of that they were not going to be surprised. You know, and one of the striking things about a cluster of 17 cases that Nick described is it was a virus, it was a coronavirus in 2003. It's a coronavirus now. It began on the Chinese mainland and hopped to Hong Kong. It spread from there across the world. You know, they have literally been here before, some of the experts at the WHO. But as Nick, you know, intimated in his talk, it's a social question as to how we respond to disease, and that's where fear and uncertainty really kicks in, because everyone feels so disconcerted, up to and including the American president, that they can behave irrationally at times, that they're, you know, we lose our better judgment because we're trying to emotionally process something that feels deeply destabilizing for us. And I've certainly had those feelings where you feel out of control, and you things that you felt were solid suddenly seem much less solid.
Absolutely. Nick, have you got any further thoughts on just how odd it feels to have made these two works literally just on the eve of a pandemic?
Well, I mean, one of the things that happened for me after we had the residency was that sort of heightened awareness around every news report of some outbreak somewhere around the world. And in the course of the sort of 18 months or 2 years between us taking our residency there and COVID-19 coming out, there was talk of Ebola outbreaks in Africa. There was sort of other places where it could have come from, and talking to the team at WHO, everyone there kind of advocates for their disease as being the most dangerous. You know, everyone says it's going to be flu from the flu department. Everyone says it's going to be Ebola from Ebola. But the thing that's striking is just how wearing that is to be constantly vigilant. And that was the thing that was impressive about the staff, is that it's completely invisible as work. When Chris Dye talks about lose-lose, when their work is successful, you just don't hear about it in the news at all. And I think since the residency and making the cluster have been had a much more heightened awareness of the potential for an outbreak. But each time it doesn't happen, you think, oh, like, you just don't think it's going to be this one. And I think I had that with COVID-19, thinking, well, it won't be this one. This will just be another one where they contain it. And until it gets out of control, you just don't know.
So we've got a couple of questions from the audience already, so I'm going to bring them straight in. I'm firstly going to ask a question from Julianne Pierce, who's tuning in presumably from Australia. Hi, Jules. Her question is, can you talk more about how a cluster of 17 cases and Spit spreads death are interrelated? Do you see them as separate or interconnected works?
Do you want to talk?
Yeah, sure. It would be wrong to say that we saw them as connected as we were making them in a direct sense. But what becomes clear, and I think one of the sort of fascinating things about being an artist and making artwork is often it's not quite clear why you were making something until later. You know, you're following intuition to some degree. You're looking to move into an area of uncertainty or the unknown, and to bring something back from there. You know, I believe very strongly that as an artist, you should be you should be a little bit out of your depth. You're not there to pronounce about things. You're there to explore something, and the way I see them now, looking back, is that a cluster of 17 cases is really about prevention, and it's about all the systems of control and measurement and planning that epidemiologists bring. It's about the rigor and the process of containment, contact tracing, understanding how diseases are spread. And then Spit Spreads Death is really a work about what it looks like when those measures have failed or been overcome, and then a city really collapses or really goes into a meltdown of some kind. The death rate in Philadelphia in 1918 is about 50 to 60 times higher than the death rate we've experienced here in the UK, for example. And the UK is one of the worst hit countries from COVID-19. So it's a reminder that as I heard one epidemiologist recently saying, we have to be aware of the fact that COVID-19 might be the warning for a future pandemic. COVID-19 might not be the big one. It might be one that we look back on as a precursor. So it's important that we don't allow ourselves to get too bought into the idea that this is it. There are multiple ways that disease can metastasize and spread.
And I guess this is a related question, actually, one for you, Nick, from Nina, who she picked up on your comment in your presentation about the need to socialize some of the WHO scientific discussion about infectious diseases. How do you think artists can actually help with that process of socialization?
Well, I think it was very apparent that I think what Spit Spreads Death and the cluster of 17 cases have in common is around that sort of sense that public health is actually a contested space. It's a space where, it varies obviously by country and by kind of political situation. But for us, it's one where there's, on one part is the unacknowledged work of public health workers. And so I think Spit Spreads Death tries to talk about that. And a cluster of 17 cases tries to talk about the very esoteric work and the rigorous work of epidemiologists. And so, although we're not cheerleading for those organizations, we are also kind of trying to find ways to explain and talk about that ongoing activity, which is just outside of lots of people's consciousness. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. But I think because it's also a space where, public health is also a space of tragedy, of individual tragedy, and I think artists have a role to actually acknowledge that it's a very human experience, and whatever the statistics might say about how one country is doing better than another in terms of COVID-19 doesn't actually tell you about the people who've lost family members and their individual experiences. And I think there's always a room for artists to actually reconnect with those kind of individual moments.
The other thing I would say about this, on the socialization question, is just, you know, and I have been very mindful of this in when we're criticizing authorities for their failures and their lack of action, that there is one of the binds in which they are in terms of public health response is, until everyone perceives the risk to be at a certain level, it is very difficult to move a population to take radical steps. And so they themselves are in a process of working with public opinion. It is not something where outside of an authoritarian state where everything can be done with military and political force. In a democratic environment, you have to build consensus around response, and that in itself is a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah, these are really good points. And I think we'll come back to some of those public health kind of issues towards the end of the Q&A. But I'm conscious that we've got kind of viewers joining us today from around the world, some of whom will be familiar with your work and some of whom will be encountering it for the first time. So I wonder if we could just, sort of almost have a slightly more kind of basic question, which is, to ask what you would do in a typical day, kind of as artists in Blast Theory. What does a typical day in the life of the Blast Theory studio look like? What might you find yourself doing?
I mean, the three of us have worked together for a long time, and discussion is the core thing that we're doing all day. We are discussing sometimes for hundreds of hours before we are making a piece of work, because we're trying to think about a language for the work. So we're thinking very much about the member of the public who will participate. That might be someone who is stood in a gallery in Hong Kong to look at a cluster of 17 cases. It might be someone who is coming out to walk on the parade. But we're thinking about, what is that person bringing? What is the context in which they are living, and what is possible for them to understand and to engage with? In what way can we give them a rich experience? So a tremendous amount of the work is about thinking about those particular questions, which is, what is, if I live in Philadelphia in 2019, what is my relationship to what happened 101 years ago? How can that be activated? Who is already primed for that, and who do we need to think about communicating to draw them with us? There's often a threshold into our work. So day to day, we have a bunch of whiteboards and corkboards around our studio, and most of the time, you see a couple behind me. Most of the time, we are sketching ideas, and we're talking about experiential moments, like little microscopic moments of experience, like standing still while hundreds of people pour past you. What would it be like to be on a parade where you're the only person who stands still and everyone else walks? And trying to go, is that the language? Is that the precise emotional platform that we want to give people, and trying to refine that detail? So lots and lots of discussion, sketches and drawings, very little writing, until quite a long way into the process, and then very slowly we start to build things, building pieces of software, developing designs for things, designing like the light sculptures, for example, for Spitz-Perez death, but that comes after quite a long period of reflection.
Well, you
and quite a lot of arguing.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, even after 30 years. Well, I mean, you mentioned, kind of the sort of technological development process, and I guess the next question I want to ask is around that that use of technology within your work. You're known, Blast Theory, in fact, kind of rather renowned internationally amongst game designers, mobile technology engineers, interactive media experts, for being pioneers of new technology. And whilst that wasn't necessarily the focus of the two works that you showed today, you're often, for instance, hailed as the trailblazers of location-based performances, which led to location-based games. So I wonder if you could give us an example of a way that you've integrated an innovative new technology within an artwork, and how it's helped you progress a narrative or, you know, kind of tell a story in some way. And you can pick whatever one you want.
Well, like one of the properties of our work is probably that it's formally quite diverse, I think. And one of the keys for us around technology would be, I think, really that we see technology as often having embedded affordances or properties, if not necessarily being designed to tell particular stories, they actually lend themselves to sort of dealing with particular subject matters. And I think often we've chosen a subject in relation to a piece of technology or vice versa as an approach. And I'd go back to like a project from 1999 called Desert Rain, which was one of the first times we'd used virtual environments and virtual technology. And for us, the key of really finding an interesting way to bring the technology and the narrative together was to really look at how virtuality was being used in the greater world and really deal with that as the subject. And so Desert Rain was looking at systems for virtual warfare, but also looking at how those virtual systems were allowing governments to tell different kinds of stories about what the war was and what was taking place. And so the project took the form of a game where you move through a number of spaces, and one of those spaces was a 3D game that was a virtual environment. But it really tried to counterpoint the kind of mix of different levels of experience, taking you from something that is ostensibly a game environment through to something which was very much documentary. And it talked about the direct experiences of people who'd been involved in the Gulf War of 1991, and it was specifically around the use of virtual technology in that war. So for us, you know, finding this a kind of matching between those kind of subject areas and the kind of technologies themselves, and kind of more recently, kind of working with mobile technology, I think one of the affordances of mobile is just how much it focuses on you as an individual, and it brings its experience to be entirely around a very personal and intimate conversation, and it allows new ways for you to talk to a performer or a narrator or an actor. And so that's been at the heart of lots of our location-based work, is really being able to reach out to people at arm's length who are remote from us, but in a way which is very intimate, and thinking about what could be said in that space, in an intimate space. So a work like Rider Spoke, for example, where we invite cyclists go cycling out into the city and they have a narrator in their ear that talks to them about their life, becomes a very intimate piece of work that is made entirely possible by the fact that we now have mobile devices that can speak to us.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm conscious that we've got many questions coming in from the floor, and I do want to get to them. I'm trying to work out if we can cluster some of them together. But there's one that's come in from Bernice Lee that I think is somewhat connected to what you were sharing, Nick, around, you know, almost finding the sort of the correct tool for the purpose, and thinking about how the sort of political and social dimension of your work comes through in the storytelling. So the question from Bernice is around how racial and gendered perspectives may have come up in your research, either into this project or in past projects. Have you got anecdotes about particular individual cases or stories that you might want to share? She'd love to hear about that.
Well, one of the striking things about WHO being based in Geneva is just the breadth of people who were working at the HQ in WHO. I think that was remarkable, where often it's people who've been working in the fields for decades, in whatever specialism it is that they've had. And so people have come from working in hospitals in Bangladesh or in Southern Africa, and they have trained in a very particular disease or particular kinds of procedures, and that knowledge has sort of led them through the local health hierarchy and brought them to WHO headquarters. And often people are spending their time at WHO for just a few years before they kind of go back. You know, there's a kind of strong movement of people moving from administration back into kind of practice in WHO. So that was one of the interesting things that we found from our residency.
Yeah, I would say, just sort of linking back to your point, the original question before, Honor, about technology, you know, we're very conscious of the way in which technology is gendered in particular, and the origins of technology. You know, lots of the technology we're using every day comes out of military research and has a very particular set of properties baked into it from the outset. You know, it's important to remember that GPS was designed to guide missiles to their destination. You know, that's where it comes from. So it may be useful in all our phones, but from the very outset, it had a particular set of purposes. And so I think thinking about trying to critique the mindset of a predominantly white, predominantly male cohort of engineers and entrepreneurs who are creating the technologies that we're using every day has always been really important for us. We made an app called Karen a few years ago, which is looking at how data is collected and manipulated in the background as part of your experience. And so that is very much thinking about virtual agents and algorithmic systems of control. You know, we're very aware that those are both gendered and racialized, and you know, we try to address those, you know, at the right level for each particular piece of work.
So we've got a cluster of questions that have come in from the audience, which is you know, around COVID-19, and I think there's a lot of curiosity about you know, how artists might respond to the specific kind of pandemic that we're going through. So I'm going to take a couple at the same time. So Emma makes the observation that with the current situation we have, we're still seeing, you know, groups of people thinking of COVID-19 as akin to the common flu. So what could be done to help convince groups of people about the importance of staying at home for the better good? And perhaps a related question from Melinda: if you were asked today to make a work in response to the current pandemic, what would you be most interested in exploring? Put you on the spot there.
Yes, I mean, I think we will not be making a piece of work in response to the pandemic. It feels, you know, to us, it doesn't feel like a productive place to be making work, for a number of reasons. But I mean, most particularly because there is so much still to process about this experience for us personally and for us sort of collectively. And on the sort of question of convincing people, you know, I think it's different everywhere in the world, and it's very important not to generalize too heavily. My experience here in the UK is, and the data bears this out, is that there's been enormous amounts of compliance, tremendous degrees of respect towards health workers. There has been plummeting confidence in the government, as the government has misrepresented its efforts in a number of key places, most particularly in terms of daily testing, where a program of systematic lying is currently underway in the UK. You know, one of the battles that is now underway is not just with the disease, it's about the narrative about how people responded to the disease. And Naomi Klein is only one of the thinkers who we could look to for reminders of how, when a crisis happens, like 9/11, like Hurricane Katrina, like the financial crisis of 2008, there is a battle for control of the narrative as to what exactly happened there. And I think it's important that we advocate for strong forms of collective action and mutual aid that we've seen. And I'm, as far as I'm aware, that is internationally spread as well. But as I say, I'm certainly no expert. It's not to be Pollyanna-ish and deny acts of selfishness, acts of stupidity, and those are out there. but it's important not to cherry pick as well. It's important to look at it in its totality.
So I'm going to end the questions from the floor, and I'm very sorry to those of you who we didn't get to. We just had this huge flood of questions come in at the end, but this very thoughtful reflection from Samuel Sim feels like a nice moment to kind of end on. He comments, "I really love the idea of merging public demonstration with honouring those who have since passed. Going forward from this, how do you think as artists, activists and people, we can create similar moments of self-reflection, empathy and solidarity, especially in the time of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, there's obviously some logistical challenges with social distancing, and there have been protest movements obviously since the outbreak, and I think those activities can still go ahead, I think, safely in all kinds of forms. And I've seen some interesting forms of protest. I know Extinction Rebellion in London had a protest in absence of protesters, where they just left the shoes of the protesters in Trafalgar Square, I think, as a way of demonstrating how many people would have attended. But I think one of the kind of questions is I'd go back to Matt's kind of question around reflection and time to reflect. That it is quite a monumental experience that we're now trying to process, and finding space to actually have a sort of humane and a more thoughtful point of view on what's happened needs time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it is a question of processing at different levels and different stages. And I've certainly had days where I felt very hopeless and completely listless. No energy, no sense of how to do anything in response to anything. And then you come out of it, and then you go back in again. And so I think we're all coming out of that, and I think I hope that artists will have a key role to play in that process. But I also hope that there will be a historical memory that this generation will carry forwards about a moment of international connection. One of the things that I really take from this experience is that it's emphasized why international connections and collaboration is so essential in a period where lots of national movements were pushing against international collaboration and international organizations. But yeah, in terms of moments to reflect, I think we'll need different things at different times, and this is going to be a process of months and years. I think we're now at a stage where we can all see that there is not an end that is coming for this thing. It is just going to very slowly become less of a direct part of it in our lives, but that is a process of months and years.
And well, thank you so much for these reflections. We know that the topic of today's talk was difficult, and for those who have been directly impacted by the pandemic or other illness, may have triggered some really troubling emotions. But I think it's really important to have conversations like this and to talk about kind of our emotional responses to phenomena such as this, and the incredible care and empathy that your work is known for provides an almost a language and a form of being able to process kind of some of what's going on now. Even by looking at these extraordinary kind of and somewhat prescient past examples. So thank you so much, Matt and Nick, for taking the time to share today. As I shared earlier, this is the first of a series of talks that we'll be programming at Art Science at Home over the next few months, which look at how art can sometimes act as an early warning system and can give clues about what might happen in the future. So stay tuned, come back and see our future talks on this topic. In the meantime, our Feeling the Future online conference reaches its culmination in a couple of weeks' time with the final presentation by the co-founder of the Thought Collective, Tong Yi. That'll be an unmissable presentation. It's something that we've been kind of working towards at Art Science at Home for many months. So come back and join us for that. In the meantime, we wish all of you very well. Thank you so much for your questions today, and thanks for tuning in from around the world. That's it from us. Bye-bye.